You know the logo. A boy sits on a crescent moon, fishing rod in hand, casting his line into the clouds. For millions of people, it's a sign that you're about to see a movie like Gladiator, Saving Private Ryan, Shrek, or Kung Fu Panda. But that logo represented more than just a studio. It represented a dream team. In 1994, three of the most powerful men in Hollywood came together to form a super band that was supposed to revolutionize the entire entertainment industry. It was called DreamWorks SKG for its three founders: Steven Spielberg, the most successful director of all time; Jeffrey Katzenberg, the animation guru who had just resurrected Disney; and David Geffen, the billionaire music mogul who had signed everyone from the Eagles to Nirvana. Their goals were simple, and they were summed up in three words: freedom, revenge, and power. They wanted the artistic freedom to create without studio interference. They wanted the power to control their own destiny. And Jeffrey Katzenberg, well, he wanted revenge. In less than a decade, they would win 3 Best Picture Oscars in a row and create the single biggest animated franchise in the world. But just a few years after that, the company would be torn apart, sold for scrap, and left in billions of dollars of debt. This isn't just a story about a studio that failed. It's the story of how a company built on massive ambition collapsed under its own weight. To understand DreamWorks, you have to understand why Jeffrey Katzenberg was so angry. In the 1980s, Disney Animation was in bad shape. Their 1985 movie, The Black Cauldron, was a dark, expensive flop that barely made back half its budget. The CEO, Michael Eisner, essentially pointed at the struggling animation department and told Jeffrey Katzenberg it was his problem now. Katzenberg, who animators said didn't know what he was doing, took on the challenge with a brutal focus. He wasn't interested in art. He told his team, "I'm not interested in the Academy Awards. I'm interested in the Bank of America Awards." He ran grueling gong show pitch meetings and pushed for an aggressive one-movie-a-year schedule that animators hated. But it worked. Katzenberg oversaw the Disney Renaissance: The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, the first animated film ever nominated for Best Picture, Aladdin, and the biggest of them all, The Lion King. Katzenberg had saved Disney, and when Disney's president, Frank Wells, tragically died in a helicopter crash in 1994, Katzenberg felt he had earned the job. He went to Michael Eisner and asked for the position. Eisner said no. Making matters worse, Eisner took the job for himself. For Katzenberg, this was the ultimate betrayal. He had been passed over by his friend and colleague. He quit Disney in 1994. But he wasn't just going to disappear. He was going to build a rival. He immediately called 2 of the most powerful men he knew. First was David Geffen, a billionaire music executive who had served as a mentor to Katzenberg. The second was Steven Spielberg. Spielberg was, and is, the most commercially successful director in history. He was coming off Jurassic Park and Schindler's List, and was frustrated with the studio system. He wanted freedom. The trio announced their new venture on October 12, 1994. DreamWorks SKG was born. They each contributed $33 million, and they brought in a massive outside investor, Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, who put in $500 million for an 18% stake. The plan wasn't just to make movies, it was to build an empire. They launched 8 different divisions almost immediately: live-action movies, animation, television, records, interactive video games, and more. They were going to compete on every front, but they had a fatal flaw. A problem that would haunt them from day one. DreamWorks had no distribution. They had to pay other studios to put their movies in theaters. Every ticket sold meant a cut for someone else. It was a leak in the ship that they just couldn't plug. And while they were building this massive machine, they still had to actually make movies. Spielberg delivered with Saving Private Ryan, a critical masterpiece. But Katzenberg? He was preparing for war. His first animated film, Ants, wasn't just a movie. It was a direct shot at Disney and their upcoming film, A Bug's Life. The stage was set for the most petty, expensive, and culturally significant rivalry in Hollywood history. It was DreamWorks versus Pixar. And the first battle was about to begin. They were a production company. They could make movies, but they had no infrastructure to actually put those movies in theaters or on video store shelves. To do that, they had to strike deals with the very studios they were competing against, like Universal or Paramount. It was like building a state-of-the-art car factory but having to ask Ford to borrow their trucks to deliver your cars. The company's first few years were rough. Their first release was a failed TV sitcom called Champs that was canceled after 12 episodes. Their first live-action movie, The Peacemaker, in 1997, was a simple action movie that barely made its money back. While Spielberg's name brought prestige with films like Amistad, the live-action side was struggling to find a foothold. But Jeffrey Katzenberg was busy starting a different kind of war, the animation war. He had been exiled from Disney, so he set his sights on Disney's most important new partner, Pixar. While at Disney, Katzenberg had worked with Pixar on Toy Story. After leaving, reports say he met with Pixar's John Lasseter, who pitched him their next idea, a movie about bugs. Katzenberg was reportedly pressed for details. Soon after, DreamWorks announced its own first animated movie, Ants, a computer-animated film about bugs. The Pixar team was furious. They saw it as a direct betrayal. Katzenberg fast-tracked production on Ants specifically to beat Pixar's movie The Theaters. Ants was released on October 2, 1998. A Bug's Life came out just 1 month later. While A Bug's Life ended up making more money, Ants was still a hit. It was the most successful non-Disney animated film at the time. But Katzenberg wasn't just trying to copy Pixar. He wanted to beat Disney at its own game. His next film, The Prince of Egypt, was a hand-drawn epic. It was a prestige picture designed to prove he could make the kind of sweeping, important films that Disney wouldn't. Then, in 2001, DreamWorks released the movie that would define it forever. It was a project that had been stuck in development hell, a film so troubled that creators were reportedly reassigned to it as punishment. It was an irreverent, pop-culture-laced, cynical fairy tale. It was Shrek. Shrek was a phenomenon. It grossed nearly $500 million. In 2002, when the Academy Awards introduced the first ever Oscar for Best Animated Feature, Shrek won, beating Pixar's Monsters, Inc. Katzenberg had his revenge. He had built a bigger kingdom. And at the exact same time, Spielberg's side of the company finally found its groove. DreamWorks went on an unprecedented run, winning the Academy Award for Best Picture 3 years in a row. American Beauty in 2000, Gladiator in 2001, and A Beautiful Mind in 2002. By 2002, DreamWorks was the king of Hollywood. They were dominating animation and live-action prestige. They were on top of the world, and it was all about to fall apart. The problem was, for every Gladiator or Shrek, DreamWorks had a dozen failures. Those 8 divisions they launched, almost all of them were bleeding money. DreamWorks Interactive, the video game division, was one of the few bright spots, created the first Medal of Honor. But despite this huge success, Spielberg was losing interest, and they sold the whole division to EA in 2000. DreamWorks Records had decent success, but with the rise of Napster, sold to Universal, it lost the studio $125 million. By 2004, the Dream Team was in trouble. The company was reportedly $400 million in debt. They were desperate for a way out. The two falls of DreamWorks. Here is where the story gets confusing, because DreamWorks didn't die once. It died twice. First, the live-action studio. Katzenberg, Spielberg, and Geffen knew the company was sinking. Their solution was a masterstroke of financial engineering. They took the one part of the company that was consistently profitable, the animation studio, and spun it off. In 2004, DreamWorks Animation became its own separate, publicly traded company. Katzenberg left to become CEO. This saved animation from the debt. But Spielberg and Geffen were left holding the failing live-action company. They approached General Electric, who said they were not profitable enough. Finally, in 2005, Viacom, the parent company of Paramount, agreed to buy the live-action studio for $1.6 billion. The dream was over. The independent studio built to fight the system was now just a boutique label inside one of the biggest studios in town. Spielberg and Geffen were now, essentially, employees. Spielberg reportedly hated the lack of autonomy. In 2008, they left Paramount. David Geffen, seeing the writing on the wall, cashed out and left the company for good. Spielberg was the last founder standing. And in a final bitter twist of irony, in 2009, his new studio signed a distribution deal with the one company they were created to destroy, Disney. Even that didn't work. The films performed poorly, and in 2016, Disney declined to renew the deal. The live-action DreamWorks was folded into Amblin Partners, where it exists today as little more than a brand name on films like 1917 or Green Book. That was the first fall. The second fall was happening at the same time. Katzenberg's independent studio had huge hits with Shrek 2 and Kung Fu Panda, but it was also spending wildly. A string of expensive flops, like Rise of the Guardians and Turbo, put the company in a desperate position. Disney, meanwhile, was having a massive resurgence with Frozen and Tangled. Katzenberg's kingdom was crumbling. In 2016, a new buyer emerged. NBC Universal bought DreamWorks Animation for $3.8 billion. Jeffrey Katzenberg, who had reportedly received about $400 million in the deal, finally left the company he had built. From revenge. The studio was absorbed into Universal. So what is DreamWorks today? It's not a company. It's two different brands owned by two different mega corporations. The live-action library is part of Spielberg's Amblin. The animation company, its characters, and theme park rights are all owned entirely by NBC Universal. The dream team is gone. Spielberg is the only one left. Geffen is an art collector. And Katzenberg? Well, he took his millions and founded Quibi. Was DreamWorks a success? As a business, it was a spectacular failure. It was an ambitious, top-heavy giant that collapsed under its own debt. But as a creative force, its legacy is undeniable. It proved a studio outside Disney could dominate animation. It redefined the genre with Shrek. And for 3 years, it dominated the Oscars. The founders wanted freedom, revenge, and power. In the end, they got a taste of all three. But none of them lasted. The dream, as it turned out, was just too big to sustain. So I have to ask, what do you think? Was DreamWorks a necessary disruptor that changed Hollywood for the better? Or was it just a failed vanity project for 3 billionaires? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.